I'm Renee Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. We have some really interesting topics today.
We really do. We've got two really important topics here in Kentucky. One's dealing with invasive plants and one's dealing with oak. Both are important issues that we deal with all the time here in Kentucky, and we're really excited to have our speakers. But first, thank you all for joining us. If you do have any questions, you can use the chat function via Zoom, and we'll respond to you that way. And we do appreciate each of you all for taking the time on your schedule. Renee, the holiday season's approaching. People are busy, but thank you all for being with us today. We do appreciate that. But today's show, we have Alexandra Blevins, who's with the Kentucky Division of Forestry. She's going to be talking about managing that bush honeysuckle. And we may get a cameo in there from Dr. Ellen Crocker as well. And then after Alexandra, we're going to have Darren Morris, and Darren's going to be talking about sustainable oak practices, which is something near and dear to all of our hearts because oaks are so important, not only to wildlife, also important to our timber industry, and so much more. So they're really a foundational species. So really excited about having both of our presenters and glad you all could be with us today.
Definitely. So let's go ahead and get started. Alexandra, if you want to turn your camera on.
Hello there.
Hey, Alexandra.
Thanks for joining us, you two. Tell us a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today.
Well, we actually just had our invasive plant conference back in November, and we heard from a lot of folks that, managing our common invasives such as bush honeysuckle, which we have a lot of here in the bluegrass, is still a much needed topic that, is needing to be covered for folks out there trying to manage their woodlands. So what we're getting ready to view, we'll walk you through all the steps of some different types of management techniques that the Kentucky Division of Forestry has been working on at Big Bone Lick State Park up north, and the work that we've done there and trying to highlight that.
Yeah, and I got to tag along with you all, you and Kenneth Smith and the whole team, and get some footage of your practices in managing honeysuckle, which I think are really instructive and useful for folks because honeysuckle is one of those invasive plants that is everywhere in central Kentucky and northern Kentucky and increasingly beyond. Invasive honeysuckle is all over the place, and you all really do a great job of walking through some different management options that are available to folks.
Hello there, my name is Alexandra Blevins and I'm the Forest Health Specialist with the Kentucky Division of Forestry.
And I'm Kenneth Smith and I am the Hemlock Crew Lead for the Kentucky Division of Forestry, and we are here today to actually highlight a little bit about invasive honeysuckle removal.
We are here to demonstrate a little bit of what our crew does to remove invasive bush honeysuckle. So why are we removing this plant, you might be asking yourself? So it is a really bad invasive that we have here in the state of Kentucky. Bush honeysuckle is actually more than just one species of honeysuckle. It's multiple different species, but the most common that we have here in the state of Kentucky is called a myrrh honeysuckle, or Lonicera mackii for the scientific name. And so why is it so bad for our environment? So you'll see behind us, we're kind of in a forest of bush honeysuckle. So these plants, they grow very rapidly and they spread very rapidly, and they will actually take over and dominate our natural areas as well as urban areas. Pretty much any site that they can become established on, they will outcompete our native plants communities here in the state and in other states as well. So not only are they rapidly spreading, they also produce tons and tons of seeds. A mature plant can produce up to 1 million seeds, and they're spread by birds, so they can even, get spread around in other ways. And they can grow in pretty much any soil type. So, whether it's really great soil or disturbed sites, they can grow anywhere. And so, we're facing a lot of different obstacles with this one invasive plant. You'll notice as we are kind of moving around today, we are actually within a forest inside of a forest. So this plant, it's very shade tolerant. It can be, so it will grow in the understory of these forests, our native forests, and they will dominate the understory. But when we get light gaps, such as what's happening with the ash and the demise of the ash from the emerald ash borer, we're getting all of these light gaps that are opening up within our forests, and these invasive species such as bush honeysuckle are taking over these areas, and they can do so because they grow so rapidly and outgrow our native species. All right, so now we're going to talk about how to ID bush honeysuckle. So a little fun tidbit actually, so if you come across any bush honeysuckle, it's actually all going to be non-native. We don't have a native bush honeysuckle here in the state of Kentucky. So if you come across anything that has these characteristics, you know that it's an exotic, non-native, and you should probably think about managing it. So the first thing that you'll notice as we're walking around today is that they still have their leaves on them. So bush honeysuckle is one of the plants that is first to leaf out, and then they're the last to drop their leaves. And so it's a really good identification characteristic. And so as you can see, on the specimen that we have here, the leaves are kind of just your generic simple leaf shape. And they are arranged opposite on the branch, so that means that they, instead of alternately, they're just right across from each other. And so they remain pretty green, more green than most other plants, and they will eventually get a yellow coloration for fall before they drop. And so that's what you're going to want to look for with the leaf characteristics. And then Kenna here has those red berries that we had mentioned. They produce a lot of these red berries, and they're actually kind of, birds can spread them, but they're kind of like the fast food version of berries. Birds can get way more nutritional value from our native plants rather than these berries here. So, what you're seeing typically at where the berries are in the summertime, usually starting around May, they will get either yellow or white flowers on them. They're very, very fragrant, almost sickeningly sweet smelling once you've worked with bush honeysuckle for a while. And if we can look at some bark, it is a tannish gray in coloration, and it's got kind of these vertical stripes to it, or strips, and it's almost kind of shaggy as the tree gets older. Kind of will flake off on you a little bit. So, and another key characteristic, the stems of the bush honeysuckle are actually hollow. So the pith there in the middle, you can see, is hollowed out. It's almost like a straw. When you come into areas that are pretty much established with this invasive plant, it is very striking in appearance. They will become a dense thicket of all varying sizes of plants. They can be, small little shrubs, and then as you'll see today, they can grow into these monster-sized trees, a multi-stemmed bush that turns into, can be up to 20 feet tall. So these things, they get very big, and they like to spread. There are a couple of lookalikes, native plants that we don't want to harm when we're in a location removing bush honeysuckle. To be on the lookout for native coralberry. It won't get as large as a bush honeysuckle plant. They're going to be about knee, thigh high plants. And they actually, their berries, which you could probably see them right now, are almost a magenta pink color, and they're kind of clustered together. And then the other one that you might get bush honeysuckle confused with is our native spice bush. And so this one also has a red berry, but they're much larger and kind of oblong shaped. And if you were to kind of squash that berry or even break a twig, it's got a very fragrant, nice smell to it. So, as you can see behind Kenna and I, we are pretty much fully surrounded by the invasive bush honeysuckle. So it might seem a bit daunting at first when you're maybe starting a project, invasive removal project on your own property, or maybe you're volunteering and helping out some other organizations. But you really just have to take it a step at a time and approach it in small little bits, and believe me, they all add up in the end. And so, you know, as we were talking about before, we get some really monster size bushes, and as you can see, this one prime example behind us is about, at its base, probably about a 7 or 8 inch DBH tree. And so, you know, we're in the thick of these large plants, and we've got another one over here that's about an inch DBH. And so there's going to be multiple different ways that you tackle these different sized plants. And so we're going to touch on some of those ways to tackle these invasive plants and show you some demonstrations of what our crew has been doing, and just kind of walk you through the basics on how to approach removal on your own property. You know, there's actually multiple different ways that you can approach invasive plant removal. You know, some folks might not be as comfortable with using herbicides, so there are avenues for those folks as well. So on our smaller size plants, about bush honeysuckle that's about knee height or below, you can actually hand pull those, and you just want to make sure that you get you know, a really good solid grip around the base of that plant and pull it with all your might, and you know, get the majority of that root system, because one of the major issues with bush honeysuckle and a lot of other invasives actually is they will re-sprout like crazy. So if any of that root is left, it's going to eventually re-sprout and become another problem for you. So, you know, you've got, you know, manual hand pulling that you can do for smaller plants. There are other mechanical means where you don't have to use herbicides or chemicals. There are things on the market such as weed wrenches. For folks that don't want to dabble with, you know, the chemical side of things. We don't have any of that to demonstrate today, but they are out there on the market, and you can learn about them. And then, you know, as we, and that technique can work on stems that are about 2 inches in diameter or smaller. So once you get into these bigger bush honeysuckle plants, you know, you're not really going to be able to achieve what you want with the mechanical side of things. And so, you know, I would encourage you to look into all of your options and really do the research about herbicide and proper application, because it can be a vital tool in our toolbox when it comes to removing invasive plants, not just bush honeysuckle. And so what we're going to demonstrate today are two really vital attacks to bush honeysuckle, which is, first of all, a cut stump treatment, and that's where we're going to get as close to the ground, cut that stump, and then apply herbicide immediately after that, and then also follow up foliar spray. And so, you know, whenever we're working with herbicides, we want to make sure that you properly read the label, follow the label, because that is the law. And as you can see, Ken and I both have on long sleeves, long pants, shoes, socks, gloves, and eye protection. So follow your PPE. You know, all of these chemicals are safe to use when doing it properly, but you want to make sure that you follow all that safety.
So to give you guys an example of bush honeysuckle removal and what Kentucky Division of Forestry has been working on, here at Big Bone Lick, they have a plethora of bush honeysuckle, and so we've actually been working on a project to help them remove some of that. So what we have right here behind me is a good example of the bush honeysuckle that we are working on removing. So as you can see, it is all entangled within itself, and we have all different sizes of bush honeysuckle, from small to very big. So one of the methods for bush honeysuckle removal is called the cut stump method. And what we do for this method is to cut the trunk of the honeysuckle as far down to the ground as we possibly can. And then once we do that, we immediately apply the herbicide. And we do that by using either a dauber or a little small sprayer. And so our sprayer or our daubers have our herbicide in them, and most of the time what we're using is a glyphosate herbicide, and so we'll use that to treat the stump. And then in the spring, if the stump has started to resprout with new leaves, then we'll use a foliage spray and spray those leaves to go ahead and finish treating the honeysuckle. On some of our smaller bushes, we'll actually use loppers and hand saws to cut the honeysuckle and then apply the herbicide. If we have large bush honeysuckle, then what we'll actually use is a chainsaw to remove the honeysuckle and then apply the herbicide afterwards.
So here we're at an area where we have currently, recently removed some bush honeysuckle, and you can actually see some still bush honeysuckle in the background of the shot. And so what we wanted to demonstrate here are these piles that we've made. And so depending on what your management perspectives are and what you want your objective and goals to be, you may be looking for some additional wildlife habitat. So these piles that we've created of the bush honeysuckle stems that have been cut, you can actually pile them on your property, and this will be a great little thicket for small mammals such as rabbits or birds. Songbirds love them. And so this is just one demonstration of how you can kind of compile these stems on your landscape to provide an extra benefit after you've cut the stems down. You can also leave them standing if you're using a foliar spray or something like that. But they will degrade pretty rapidly on the landscape once they're cut. So, as you can see this wide open space behind us, and that is because the hemlock treatment crew has been persistently coming back to this area for 3 years, first doing that cut stump of all the large bush honeysuckle plants, and then as with any invasive plant removal, follow-up is key and very necessary. So once you get that initial round of cut stump removal done, you're going to want to monitor that area and look for those resprouts that we talked about earlier. And you can use a foliar spray technique to hit those very quickly and efficiently, and that will get the remainder of those resprouts and kill those back. And you're going to want to follow through, for at least 3 to 5 years, and make sure that you are getting all of, any new seed set that might come up. And just be persistent, and persistence is key when it comes to invasive removals. But you get a really awesome reward of this wide open, beautiful woodland that you can see behind us. And once you remove a lot of that understory canopy that was taken up by the bush honeysuckle, as soon as the next year, we were finding trout lily, a wonderful native flora, also trillium species, and all different, lots of fun native plants that will come back that you might have never known that were on your land. But once you remove the bush honeysuckle that's, pretty much taking all of the light for photosynthesis, you can get some really awesome native plants that will show up the next year. Well, we'd really love to thank all of you all out there for joining us today on this virtual tour of our bush honeysuckle removal project at Big Bone Lick. And a special thanks to these folks right here. This is our Kentucky Division of Forestry hemlock crew and invasive plant removal crew that have been doing all this great work up here at Big Bone Lick. We have our crew lead, Kenneth Smith, Chuck McIntosh, one of our interims, and Becca Johnson, our other interim, up here. And they've been doing a lot of hard work, so we'll give them, that virtual round of applause. And keep up the great work, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if you all would like to learn more about what our Forest Health Program is doing within the Kentucky Division of Forestry, you're more than welcome to look us up on our social media page. We have a Facebook page. Just look up Kentucky Division of Forestry and you can reach out to us there. You also have excellent resources at your county extension offices through UK. And, just feel free to reach out with anything and everything Forest Health related.
Well, that was great. Thank you. We greatly appreciate that that video. And, you know, it sounds like it's just not something that you can just do once and you're done.
No, definitely not. Invasive plant removal is a continuous process. And if you just do it once and don't follow up on it, it's going to be back again just as bad in a few years. But the good news is that once you kind of do it once and you clear out all that honeysuckle, it's a lot less work to kind of scout around and stay on top of things than it is, you know, that first time. So it's going to get easier. Never going to be done, but it's going to get easier.
So we did have a question about what glyphosate percentage do you recommend?
Yes, I was just replying to that, but I'll go ahead and talk about that live. So Jim, that's an excellent question. For the cut stump portion, we do about a 50-50 cut of water and glyphosate mixture, and that will knock those back. And what we didn't really talk about in that video, you're just going to want to, if you're using a dauber, which those are excellent, you can get the little bingo daubers, and we use those sometimes as well. And so you'll just get around the outer portion, that sapwood that's active and pulling that systemic chemical down into the roots to kill it. So you don't even have to daub the entire cut cross-section surface. And then for the foliar spray application, I think it's about a 2 to 4% if you're using glyphosate. And always remember to check that label.
They also want to know when's the best time, like does it work in the winter time?
So for the cut stump, you can do that later into the year, but really it's a, you know, the systemic process is what is pulling, you know, that chemical down to the root. So we typically hit that really hard in the springtime into the summer, and you can continue with that. But then, you know, you don't want to really be doing that in the winter time because the plants really aren't active. They're not, you know, getting that evapotranspiration that's moving things through the sapwood. And then
a great time to do it would be right now or in the late fall is a good time to do that as bush honeysuckle takes its nutrients from its leaves and puts those into the root system.
Mm-hmm.
And triclopyr is another one. We mentioned glyphosate, but triclopyr is another very effective one. And I've actually done that pretty successfully into the winter as well. The one time of year you want to avoid is leaf out. You do not want to be doing that during the leaf out period.
Okay.
Yeah.
Looks like a lot of people have a lot of different ways that they remove this.
I
Thank
think
you
that
for
speaks
letting us
to
know.
how much it is out there, Renee, you know, and how much we're having to deal with it for sure. Yeah.
So we thank you both for joining us and talking a little bit about how to get rid of this and
Yeah.
ongoing process, evidently.
Yeah.
don't give up.
Yes, but remember, folks, if we can catch it small, we can make it a smaller problem to deal with. If you let it go, look out.
You see how big of a problem it can turn into by that.
That's right.
All right. Thank you, you two.
And before we wrap up, I do want to give a shout out. If you want to get some hands-on experience doing honeysuckle removal, we had someone in the chat mention this. The Remove Invasives Partnership of Franklin County is having a working day for invasive plant removal, honeysuckle, and more, I bet, on Friday. So check out that group if you want to join.
Yeah, good deal.
Awesome.
Okay, great. Thank you for joining
Yes,
us.
excellent. Thank you, Ellen.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me.
Great video. Very cool, Renee. Yeah.
Definitely. You know, coming up though, we're talking about white oak. You know, we're doing that this time, and then next week we're also going to have a whole show dedicated to the future of white oak. So I hope everybody tunes in for that as well.
Yeah.
But today we have Darren Morris to talk about sustainable white oak.
So today I'm going to, I know I've spoken about oak practices in the past in different ways. And today I'm going to hit it kind of from a different angle, at least from what I've done before, because I want people to be aware that sustainable oak practices aren't designed to just make the forest better. They each actually have a specific purpose, you know, kind of one thing, one problem, an issue that you want to try to solve. And by using the practices to solve each issue separately, they can be used in combination as well.
All right, well, looking forward to your presentation. Remember, folks, if you have any questions whatsoever, type them in the chat pod.
So each of the White Oak Initiative Sustainable Oak Practices is designed to address one of designed to address one or more of the difficulties that upland oaks typically face. Each practice works individually, like I just said, but they're also often implemented in combination or as a progression to solve more complex issues. So the reason I added "and how they affect forests" to the slide title here is because there is no management practice that creates a healthy forest. That's just not how it's done. Instead, each practice solves a specific issue or problem in order to achieve a particular goal. For example, you have no oak regeneration in your forest, so you do a practice to get oak regeneration established. The practice is complete and it was successful if you accomplish that. But you still have a young 1-year-old seedling, and those seedlings are still too small to compete successfully. So the next challenge is to implement a different practice to further develop that too small regeneration into more vigorous 4 feet tall seedlings and saplings, which are called advanced regeneration. So each practice does something specific. For each practice, I'll explain as we go through these, the simple answer to what does the practice do, what's the problem or issue with the forest that indicates a possible need for the practice, and what is the desired goal after the practice is completed, which is probably to solve the problem or issue, right? The first practice we'll look at is soil scarification. So what does this practice do? Well, it creates, gets oak regeneration in the forest where there is none. What it really does, it creates conditions where acorns have a better chance of making direct contact with the soil through the thick layers of leaves that have built up, and thus successfully germinate the following spring. The problem or issue in the forest that you notice is that there's no oak regeneration at all, only mature trees. So if there's no oak regeneration and it's nearing the time of a harvest, the problem needs to be fixed or you're going to lose oak in that stand. So that means the goal is obviously to have enough oak seedlings in the understory necessary to continue to have oak as a major component of the forest throughout the future. And this means seedlings need to continue to grow and develop into advanced regeneration. This is a forest that has almost no oak regeneration, but it's going to be harvested within 10 years. So the immediate goal is to establish oak seedlings. If the landowner proceeds with the harvest without addressing the lack of the oak regeneration, the oak component is going to be lost or diminished in the future. And of course, that's a problem. Soil scarification is the disturbance of the forest leaf litter and soil in order to allow acorns a better chance at germination by making that soil contact. So a dozer with a rake blade, as you see in the picture, can be used to move and twist and spin around between the mature trees in the forest and create these conditions. So notice the difference in the forest floor, the leaf litter, where the dozer has passed. You've got a much greater percentage of acorns now making direct contact, right? Hopefully, which of course is going to increase the number of new seedlings next spring. Remember, with the goal of this practice is to create oak seedlings where there are none. That means we can't just walk away because these new seedlings, as I mentioned earlier, they're there now. That's good, but they're still too small. They have small root systems and they still won't be able to compete after a harvest when sunlight's brought in. So they're going to need to be developed into advanced regeneration, 4 feet tall, with more leaves, better developed root systems, more vigorous. So the forester, the landowner, will have to continue to monitor and make sure that these conditions are met. That brings us to the next practice, mid-story removal. What does this practice do? Well, it develops already existing oak regeneration into advanced regeneration. The problem is that oak regeneration is too small to compete, right? And there's obviously a dense shade issue with mid-story removal. So you've got that mid-story issue where it's shading out the small understory seedlings that you need to release. And the goal is to remove this mid-story. Usually that's all the trees that's not in the overstory, all the trees not a part of the main canopy of the forest. So notice the main canopy of the trees remains intact, but the understory trees, the non-oaks, were removed, as you can see in the background where the mid-story practice stopped. And now you're going to have sunlight. The sunlight's going to come in and hit those young oak seedlings, which are now available to take that in. They will grow and develop for 3 or 4 years, hopefully becoming advanced regeneration. Once you have suitable advanced regeneration, the oaks will be in much better condition to compete. Say in the event of a timber harvest or really any disturbance, such as the ice storm, heavy winds during a thunderstorm, and so on. Enhancement planting, also referred to as enrichment planting, provides immediate increase of oak reproduction into a forest in order to supplement the existing numbers of trees per acre that are there. So in most cases, you have little to no oak regeneration at all. And you come in and you plant trees. These are healthy, vigorous oak seedlings called enhancement planting, which can immediately solve the problem of no advanced regeneration. And the problem is, yes, there may be some oak advanced regeneration, but there's not enough. So we need more. We need to have a better chance of these oaks making it to the overstory. And the goal is to provide additional advanced regeneration by planting, once again, high quality oak seedlings. That's very important, so that the total amount of oak regeneration is sufficient. Enhancement planting is the planting of the high quality, vigorous tree seedlings, usually bare root seedlings. The size and quality are very important, and the goal is to immediately establish advanced regeneration. Enhancement planting can be done in conjunction with a different regeneration event, perhaps a mid-story removal like I just went over, or a harvest, meaning that more sunlight is going to become available very soon. So these high quality oak seedlings provide immediate advanced regeneration in forests such as this one, or in forests that no longer even have an oak component at all. You know, it's lost the oak component in the overstory. So without this practice, there won't be any oaks there in the future. Site preparation for regeneration creates optimal growing conditions for existing oak regeneration, usually following a harvest. So this issue is here is obviously that oaks are being overtopped by the unmerchantable and other low quality trees and brush that was left after a timber harvest. This often dense layer of vegetation will slow the growth and development of oaks, which are underneath all of it. And the dense vegetation actually can choke those oaks out eventually, and you know, they die off and you've lost them. So the goal is to remove these undesirable trees and other vegetation, and thus release the desired oak regeneration, allowing it to continue to grow and develop and thrive. So here's an example of where you might use this practice. This is immediately following a harvest. Sometimes you can do it immediately prior to a harvest. This low quality vegetation is shading out the desired oaks. The layers of trees can range from 1 inch in diameter to 12 inches in diameter, or even larger. They can be treated mechanically, meaning with a chainsaw, or you can use herbicide through foliar or cut stump application or other injection methods. And after the vegetation is removed, or after the herbicide has begun to take effect, the oaks underneath are allowed the sunlight and they now respond. So, okay, we're to prescribed fire. With prescribed fire, I'm going to treat this one a little differently, just because prescribed fire is fairly versatile tool, but at the same time, it does require a focus on a specific goal. So the first thing you should really be aware of is that researchers are still working out the details of when and exactly how prescribed fire can be used to overcome specific oak regeneration problems. Having said that, this practice, when properly timed and applied, definitely has the potential to aid in enhancing oak regeneration and development. It can reduce overly dense leaf litter, which can impede oak germination and also cause acorns to not survive the winter, right? If they're left on top, they send the radicle out, they don't find soil, and they end up dying. So, and of course, it can reduce logging debris following a harvest and kill some of these small undesired trees and vegetation left as well after a harvest. Usually, the problem or issue is that oak regeneration is being impeded in some way, some form or fashion. That may be a reason why you want to use prescribed fire. And of course, the goal is to create conditions that allow for oak regeneration to become established and or continue to develop and grow. In some cases, prescribed fire might be useful during post-harvest conditions, such as this one, when I don't even know if I want to try to go in there and find out how much oak component is there. What does the oak regeneration look like? I'm not sure we can get in there and maneuver around to figure that out. In other words, it may help to do a burn just to have better access, just to get a better understanding of what's going on and be able to get in there and actually do more management. Prescribed fires aren't always meant to be hot. In this case, you can see the leaves. That gives you an idea of what time of the year it is. This fire is meant to reduce damage to acorn crops. So it's not timed during the period when acorns are dropping and starting to germinate. But it can also, these cool fires can also remove species, small seedlings that are more susceptible to fire. This is a before picture of a prescribed fire that's meant to do just that: reduce leaf litter, leaf depth, that's going to favor acorn germination, and also reduce some of the fire susceptible seedlings, the non-oaks. This is the same area after the fire or during it. I think I see some flames still there. As you can see, it wasn't meant to be a hot fire. Undesirable seedlings were reduced along with the leaf litter while not damaging any of the mature trees. So the hopes that oak seedlings mostly sprout back in the spring. And would you like to see the before again? There's the before. And there's the during or after, if you will. Crop tree release is the practice that allows you to choose which crop tree continues to grow and become mature in your forest. So the forest owner can focus their dollars and attention specifically to trees that are of desired species and also will respond well after treatment, meaning that those are good, vigorous looking trees with fairly developed crowns that will respond well and achieve management objectives. The problem or issue is that if this practice is left undone, Mother Nature, so to speak, will take care of things, but it may not be the tree that you wanted to win the race. And it's also going to take decades long to do it. Let's say, for example, let's say you have a pignut hickory and a white oak battling for dominance. It may take 50 or 60 years or longer for those trees to slowly battle each other, growing side by side, each suppressing the other. the other's crown, suppressing the development. And that's 50 years of growth that you can have back by doing a crop tree release practice that can do the same thing within one season and give you fairly instant results. And the landowner or forest manager gets to choose the tree that wins. So the goal is to have a hand in deciding the species composition and quality of the forest, while at the same time increasing the growth rate of those trees. Crop tree release means releasing the crowns of pole-sized trees up to medium saw timber-sized trees. Well, when young forests, such as this one, become so dense that the crowns of these trees are touching, they're beginning to suppress each other, you can go in there and actually choose how to space those trees by choosing the crop trees to leave behind. So here is a canopy picture of a forest that has gotten to this point. Some of these trees need to be removed to provide space for better crown development of the crop trees. So the growth of all of these trees has now been greatly reduced and become almost stagnant. So openings are made, the crowns are released. Now that the crop trees are left behind with more space, these trees will grow the crown, and that means faster growth overall. This is a white oak stump after a harvest that shows the cross-section cut. Notice the very tight growth rings early on when this tree was young. Took many, many years for this tree just to become a 6 or 8 inch diameter white oak. The red circle marks the spot when a crop tree release practice was actually performed. Immediately after, the tree surged in growth by developing the crown, more leaves, more photosynthesis, more growth, right? And the tree was able to maintain dominance in the forest, and in this case, eventually become a tree that was harvested. There are also harvesting practices that go along with these oak sustainable practices, and these are techniques that are for harvesting timber. There are 3 that we address specifically with the White Oak Initiative Assessment Conservation Plan. Those are 2H deferment harvest, group opening harvest, and shelter wood establishment harvest. All 3 are similar in that they share the same answers to these questions. So I'll go over them in that way. What do these practices accomplish? Well, they're designed to create ideal conditions for further development of oak advanced regeneration and recruitment into larger size classes as the new forest grows and matures. The problem or issue that calls attention to the need is number one, if no management work has been done prior to the harvest and oak conditions aren't ready, as I've gone over with some of the previous practices, no advanced regeneration, right? Then the harvest is going to result in a loss of the oak component in some way in the future of this forest. So that means perhaps other practices may need to be implemented in conjunction with the timber harvest that fixes these problems. So the goals are to, of course, further develop oaks as a major component of the forest. This represents a 2H deferment harvest. In a 2H deferment harvest, all the timber is harvested except for around 10 to 15 reserve trees. These reserve trees are usually spaced 40, 50, 60 feet apart, depending on their size, and they're capable of producing acorns. The idea for this is that oak seedlings will develop under and in between these reserve trees, which is going to create 2 distinct age classes within this forest. These trees won't be harvested until the seedlings that will be established reach maturity. So the next harvest after a deferment, after a 2H deferment, will be maybe 80 years down the road. However, in the meantime, you have lifeboated oaks into the future. Oaks will be there because we've left them behind, and we've also left behind the means to generate oak regeneration, and we can come in and do more practices to make sure that it's successful. Notice the openings in this forest. This one's called group opening harvest or gap harvest. You create gaps. The idea is that group openings are created by cutting all the trees within about 150-foot wide opening. So each of these openings is about 150-foot wide. Research shows that the 150 feet size is ideal for oak development. So think about it. The tall trees on the edges surrounding these openings help to buffer the early morning and the late sunlight, which creates conditions more favorable to oaks. Once again, other oak practices may be needed to help grow and develop these oaks and recruit them to different size classes as the forest ages. And the final practice is called a shelterwood establishment harvest. This is where about 50% of the overall mature trees are harvested, which of course leaves about 50% behind, at least for a while, because we're coming back to get them. But these trees are left behind to help shelter the oak regeneration development. This harvest can't be implemented if there is no oak regeneration in the understory, or if the oak regeneration is too small. So that the shelterwood system of harvesting usually involves other oak practices, possibly 8 to 10 years prior to even to doing the harvest. So the shelterwood system also is different from the 2-age deferment harvest in that after an appropriate time, maybe 10 years or more, the remaining trees that were left behind will be harvested and the oaks will be completely released. So one more thing I'd like to reiterate before taking any questions. Recruitment of oaks to the next size class is certainly important. It's important for the 8-inch diameter oak to become a 12-inch diameter oak, right? It's important for the 16-inch diameter oak to become a 20-inch diameter oak. And that's one goal, that's one thing we want. But as you are hopefully aware now, oak regeneration is important. Development of oak regeneration into advanced regeneration is absolutely necessary and is actually a process that takes years, and it's not an event that just happens.
Yeah.
Well, thank
Yeah,
you,
that was
Sarah. That was a lot of great information. We greatly appreciate you doing that. And we have a ton of questions, so I just wanted
Do
you
you?
ready.
Yeah. So get you a sip of water, Darren. They're coming. I really appreciate that presentation, and as you started off, there's just not one magic bullet, right? There's just not one thing we do and then everything's perfect, right? It takes a lot of work, but I do appreciate that. And I really appreciate what the White Oak Initiative is doing and trying to outline these practices to help all of our upland oaks as well. So thank you for that, Darren, and all the work y'all are doing.
Yeah.
Definitely. All right, so let's get to some of these questions. He says, I leave white oak snags and trees that will not make suitable timber for seed propagation. Is this a good practice?
Well, maybe, because if you may be 30 or 40 years away from a harvest. The acorns, especially white oak acorns, can survive as regeneration for up to 60 years. So they can sit there and wait. It's not a bad idea to have acorns germinating in the forest floor, no matter when your cycle is as far as having a harvest, because they can sit there for a while, and a prescribed fire can make those things sprout, which is what oaks do. So if it fits into what you want to do, it's not a bad thing necessarily.
So we have a question of, in Kentucky and the USA, is white oak in general being sustainably harvested?
Okay, so that's an easy question. Right, wrong. That's a 2-hour-long answer. So what's happening is the higher quality white oaks, the grade 1s, if you will, are being harvested faster than they're growing, pretty much everywhere, especially in Kentucky. The grade 2s in Kentucky, about the same. We're cutting them about as fast as we're growing them. The low quality white oaks aren't as desirable. We're actually growing those faster than we're harvesting them. So yes to that, they are being sustained. But the high quality white oaks are slowly becoming fewer and fewer as we age through the next 50 years.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
So is burning advised to remove some of the duff layer?
So that burning could be part of a mid-story removal. Burning could be part of a shelterwood establishment harvest. Burning could be part of a post-harvest situation where everything is just so dense. You have all kinds of species that are undesirable. You don't want them, but oaks are in there. And because oaks are such good sprouters, you could burn that, perhaps favoring the oaks. And then you can also, that also allows you to be able to get in there and do some more hands-on, possibly herbicide practices to further that.
In your opinion, is hand cutting of undesirable saplings just as helpful as existing shelterwood?
So there, yes, but at a certain time, and that time is a lot of times you will release the advanced regeneration. So at some point, the advanced regeneration that you've released gets more sunlight, the trees grow, and they become pole-sized trees. But there's a time frame in there where you could lose some of those out, which means maybe going in with type of a machete. You know, I call it a machete TSI, where it's sort of low key, but you want to make sure the 12, 14 foot tall white oaks continue to thrive. And you may need to go in and remove some of that other stuff just to get to the level where you can do a good crop tree release with pole-sized trees.
Are there good companion plants to plant alongside the acorns that help enhance regeneration? Like, is there a beneficial relationship rather than a competitive one?
I mean, no, you could argue that. I mean, so black locust is nitrogen fixing, you know, so it puts nitrogen into the soil, which could help adjacent trees, right? But the best thing really would just be to have an oak every foot. The best case scenario is if you have an acre, just to have 43,560 oaks in there, which is one every foot.
All right. So Paul is asking, he says he has so many white oaks. He's wondering if some of the trees are stunted because of that. So what you just said.
So trees need to be thinned out. Right. The idea with them is the reason I said 40, thousands of oaks per acre is because that makes them compete with each other and grow straight up, like stalks of corn. They're skinny, they grow straight up. But at some point, once they get, 20 or 30 feet tall, then we need to develop that crown. And that's when you need to thin those out. So yes, sometimes you have to remove a white oak to favor another white oak or two.
True. So how much does site index influence your location choice for oak management?
Completely. It drives how you use your management practices. For instance, with a site index, call it a low quality site, a site index of 55 normally doesn't have a lot of competition. There's no yellow poplar, other trees and brush is pretty thin. So the oaks can generally get a fair amount of sunlight. In those sites, you often have oak regeneration there that you can work with. A high quality site, white oak 75 site index, has problems because you have so many, and think of a tropical forest and the competition, that must go on there. So a site index of 75, which is a medium high quality site, would have issues with yellow poplar, possibly red maple, and other things, usually northeast facing slopes. And so instead of managing for 10 or 20 white oaks per acre, maybe you just want to have one or two there. And it's also usually more intensive management to work in those areas.
Right. Well, I hate to cut you short, but we are out of time. But we greatly appreciate you all joining us. Join us again next week. We're going to talk about the future of white oak. And so that is definitely going to be a topic that you won't want to miss. It's at 11 o'clock again, same link. So all you have to do is just click the link that you had today. Again, it's at 11 o'clock. We do this every Wednesday. So I will see you next week. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.
From the woods today,